have sworn to myself that the Americans are going to pay dearly for what they are doing. When this war ends, for me will begin a much longer and bigger war. The war that I'm going to wage against them. I realize that that will be my true destiny. Fidel Castro, 1958.
No pueden perdonarnos los imperialistas. Es que estemos aquí y que hayamos hecho una revolución socialista en las propias narices de los Estados Unidos. Y que esa revolución socialista la defendemos con estos fusiles.
We are talking about a real and present danger.
Fidel Castro, the former leader of Cuba, was perceived as an enemy of the United States for several reasons. Communist ideology. Fidel Castro's government implemented a communist system in Cuba, which was directly opposed to the capitalist and democratic principles of the United States. This ideological difference led to tensions and conflicts between the two nations.
The Cuban government has been a threat since its inception. When you look at the history from inception, there's always been a hatred.
After coming to power in 1959, Castro's government confiscated all American-owned businesses and properties in Cuba without compensation. This move was seen as a threat to American economic interests and led to strained relations between the two countries and the implementation of the U.S. embargo against Cuba.
They started by confiscating every property that was available, and they have always used their intelligence service to mingle in our internal affairs. I remember with the what they call Red Avispa was around. One of the things that they had promoted was channels to be able to bring in explosive military weapon. I don't think that was really publicly said, but it was in the report from the FBI, which means that they had in mind at one point in time, if necessary, to be able to bring explosive into this country to destabilize our region.
Castro's Cuba actively supported and provided assistance to revolutionary movements around the world that were opposed to American influence. This included supporting armed groups in Latin America, Africa, and the Middle East.
La lucha armada es el único camino.
One of the biggest threats right now, which is a long-standing threat, Fidel Castro and the Cuban regime hosted the M-19 movement in Colombia, which later broke up and became part of the Colombian government. They also formed many of the guerrillas that you had in El Salvador, in Honduras, and many other Central American cities. They also have been involved in the drug trafficking from early on.
Democratic Republic of the Congo. In the early 1960s, Che Guevara and a group of Cuban soldiers participated in the civil war against Moises Font in late 1990s. Cuba sent troops to support the government of Laurent Desire Kabila in its fight against rebel groups. Cuban forces played a significant role in helping the government regain control of key areas.
Sending thousands and thousands of young Cuban soldiers to fight and die for a failed ideology was Cuba, in Angola, Mozambique, Eritrea, even Syria during the Yom Kippur.
1975 to 1991. Cuban intervention in Angola. Cuba sends troops to support the Marxist government of Angola in its fight against the National Union for the Total Independence of Angola, UNITA, rebels. Cuban troops play a crucial role in helping the Angolan government secure victory. 1977 to 1989. Cuban intervention in Ethiopia. Cuba sends troops to support the Marxist government of Ethiopia in its conflict with Somalia. Cuban forces assist the Ethiopian government in repelling Somali incursions.
There have been multiple instances. The 1980 Mariel Exodus, the 1994 Exodus, vows just to change, to get rid of a certain amount of the population that was dissident to the regime. Even when Clinton gave them, because of that little hurricane, all the agricultural conveniences to buy, and they still exploited. We've had Ana Belén Montes, now we have an ex-ambassador, moles for 20, 30 years in our government, making decisions or giving decision makers opinions about what the regime was.
The capture now of Mr. Rocha, whom I met, I was a friend of his. It did surprise me when he was actually picked up at this country. I didn't believe it at the beginning. I had a long relationship with him, a friendship. The interesting thing, he never asked me a question at all. So he never elicited any information from me whatsoever. But he had a tremendous access. So he probably did more danger to the United States than anybody else, because while he was an ambassador in different places, he was receiving all sensitive information that he distributed among the different embassies about the foreign policy of the United States. I am sure they were passing that to the Russian and also to the Chinese to their benefit. So they have been very, very harmful for this country's national security.
On November 17, 1962, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, led by J. Edgar Hoover, thwarted the war that Castro and Che had planned to wage against ordinary Americans, particularly in some of their favorite places of entertainment. 1962, the Cuban Missile Crisis occurs when the U.S. discovers Soviet nuclear missiles in Cuba. The presence of these missiles posed a direct threat to the United States, and it resulted in a heightened state of tension between the two nations.
If it weren't for Nikita Khrushchev that knew what Fidel Castro requested of him, to nuke the United States, Fidel Castro wanted to gain control of the missiles so he can fire them. He even got infuriated with Nikita Khrushchev. Told him that you have no control. We will always have control of the weapons.
Cuba supports various Marxist insurgencies and revolutionary movements in Latin America and Africa, which the U.S. views as a threat to its interests in the region.
They have had a biomedical research lab that conducts biomedical weapons. They almost got the production of cocaine. Thank God the U.S. government detected that and stopped them. That's why Fidel Castro went out and killed one of his most infamous generals and a couple of co-conspirators, but we're getting evidence that Raul Castro was also involved in the drug transaction with the recent books put out by ex-Colombian drug lords.
It was Fidel Castro Ruz who cut a deal with Roberto Suarez and started La Corporación, one of the largest drug trafficking enterprises that the world has ever known. The offsprings of La Corporación are still plaguing this hemisphere with violence. Which organizations are those? The Colombian cartels. If you listen to Carlos Leder, one of the most powerful Colombian drug kingpins, who recently published a book, he revealed that agreement cut by Fidel Castro was still ongoing with the Colombian cartel.
We saw the WASP network coming in here. We have people that got into every naval base here from Key West all the way to Brunswick. They knew where our nuclear sites are. They even had a diver going to the nuclear site here in Miami. So if you don't consider that a threat, then I don't know what a threat is.
1996. Cuban fighter jets shoot down 2 U.S. civilian aircraft operated by a Cuban-American organization, resulting in the deaths of 4 American citizens. This incident escalates tensions between the two countries. 2006. Fidel Castro temporarily transfers power to his brother Raul Castro due to health issues. This leads to uncertainty about the future of the Cuban government and the potential impact on U.S.-Cuba relations. 2023. Chinese military bases in Cuba are confirmed.
They have aligned with our main enemy, which is China and the Soviet Union, and also they have a very close tie with Iran. And the most dangerous thing is the proximity of Cuba to the United States, and those countries having access to Cuba. Like we know, they had an intelligence base in Lourdes that was used by the Soviet and then by the Chinese. They have a lot of penetration inside this country, many of them that have been detected, and most of them has not.
North Korean media portrays Cubans as comrades in the common cause of socialism. During the Cold War, North Korea and Cuba forged a bond of solidarity based on their militant positions opposing American power. Beyond economic ties, Cuba and Russia have been moving closer militarily.
It is also well documented by the interventions and interactions of the Cuban regime with organizations that are defined as terrorists by the US and the European Union. If you want examples, it's not only the fact that it was Cuba that opened the doors of the tricontinental to organizations like Hamas or Hezbollah. It's the fact that as we speak, if you want to read the resolution 2506 from the Council of Europe, you are going to find that Cuba is defined as one of the most important strategic allies of the Russian Federation in its aggression against Ukraine. And by the way, it is not only because of the sending of Cuban mercenaries to fight for Russia, again, in the aggression against Ukraine, because this has been well exposed and documented, among others, by Time magazine, is the fact that Cuba, sponsored by the Kremlin, has signed a military treaty with Belarus, with Lukashenko, who is defined as the last dictator in Europe, that allows them to send military personnel to be quote-unquote trained there for purposes that are undisclosed and so far have, at least according to reliable sources, also fed this conveyor belt of military personnel going to fight against Ukraine. Another thing that you need to take into consideration, when Russian representatives are advocating for installing nuclear-capable weapons in the Western Hemisphere, which country is the only one that basically have manifested in clear and well-defined expressions that would be willing to do so? Again, it's the same Cuban regime.
Cuba has supported publicly the horrendous massacre of civilians in Israel on October 7, 2023 by the terrorist group Hamas.
When we are talking about the October 7 attacks against Israel, you need to take into consideration that as per reliable documents, as per the White House that has put forward a 10 million fund in order to understand the financial circuits that provided the logistics for Hamas to launch this attack, you need to take into consideration the drug trafficking circuits in which Cuba and its intelligence apparatus has been involved since the early 70s.
Cuba has been included in the list of state sponsors of terrorism by the United States for several reasons. Sheltering of fugitives. Cuba has provided refuge to individuals wanted by the United States for their involvement in terrorist activities. This includes members of groups like AIDA and FARC. By harboring these individuals, Cuba has been seen as actively facilitating and protecting individuals involved in terrorist acts.
The biggest threat right now is Venezuela. Maduro's regime, narco regime, which is another thing that we're not calling things by their name. Ever since Chavez took over his power and then Maduro, they changed the route. They managed to change the governments, influence governments in all Latin America to the point we lost Manta Air Base in Ecuador. The moment that happened, all the routes that we opened that operation where we gave all those millions of dollars to Colombia, they changed all the air routes into Venezuela and became a narco state. And from there, they diverted the planes that used to go to Costa Rica and Panama. They now were flying into Haiti and the Dominican Republic and the submarine. So the United States needs to understand that a country that has the power of the money, like Venezuela, although it has over 9 million Venezuelans out of the country right now, which many are coming to us looking for help, which are causing disruption all over, which are dying going through the jungles of Panama and Colombia just to get here, along with many other who are infiltrating right now our border. That is part of the plan of the Cuban government and our enemies. And if you don't understand that alliance between Venezuela, Nicaragua, although it's a small player, they are all in cahoots. They're all playing to take out the U.S. government. How? Destroying its economy. How? By destroying our values. And that's something that people need to know they're willing to do for 30 years. This is not a one-day event. This is a 30-year event.
It's difficult to see how they're treated right now by this administration because they must consider them really a threat And I don't think they are doing enough to contain that. So Cuba had like a free hand in here. They have people coming in all the time. I am sure there is a hell of a lot of more spies at high level in this country that have not been detected. And at a point in time, if they decided to do something, Cuba would be ideal because they have so many people inside this country to destabilize the American nation.
So this is not about something that is just a potential threat. It's an existential threat that has proven time and again that they really want to hurt the security of the United States. On top of this, you might wonder, is this a clear and present danger? And the answer again is yes.